I can't pay for the full visit, Consuelo admitted, her eyes cast down, clutching her cardigan tight against her chest, as if she could hide her shame inside it. In her arms, little Beto breathed with a faint wheeze that could be heard all the way out in the waiting room. Dr. Wesley Ingram set his stethoscope down slowly and looked at her without rushing, without the pity she so feared finding in a doctor's eyes. "Pay me with what you know how to do," he said. Consuelo lifted her face. "Excuse me? Everyone in Millhaven knows you so better than anyone at the craft market. You don't even have to ask around to find that out." Wesley placed the stethoscope back against Beto's chest. "I have 4 lab coats with fraying cuffs and not a single tailor in this town willing to touch them for less than a month's rent. Bring me half of what you owe in cash and the other half in stitches. Works the same for me either way." "Doctor, I did not come here asking for charity. And I'm not offering any." Wesley's voice didn't rise even slightly. "I'm offering you a deal that's different." Beto coughed, then a rough, rattling sound that bent his small body forward. Consuelo caught him with both hands, feeling his little chest sink as he searched for air that wouldn't come through fully. "He needs the nebulizer right now," Wesley said, already on his feet, already calling through the half-open door. "Nurse Parker, get me the pediatric mask. Now, please." Nurse Parker, who had worked in that office for 11 years, walked in with the machine without asking a single question. "Almost ready, doctor," she said, handing him the mask. "Thank you, Parker. Help me get him settled on the table." Together, the two women eased Beto onto the exam table, and Wesley crouched beside him so the mask wouldn't frighten the boy. "We're going to breathe together, champ," he told the child. "You and me, nice and slow." Consuelo stood still, watching the man who had just spoken of trades hold her son's small face with a tenderness you couldn't learn in any medical school. "There you go, buddy. There you go." Wesley turned for a moment to write something down. It was then that Consuelo noticed his coat. The cuff had a crooked seam, the kind of fix someone makes when they're trying to hide a tear. Something desperate. "You didn't have a tailor do this," Consuelo said, almost without thinking. "Somebody stitched this with shaking hands." Wesley looked at his own cuff as though seeing it for the first time. "I did it myself. 2 in the morning between a delivery and an emergency call. Used whatever thread I could find in Parker's supply drawer. It shows. I know it shows." He almost smiled. "That's exactly why I'm offering you the deal, Mrs. Casillas. It's not charity. It's that I need someone who can do what I clearly cannot." Consuelo glanced down at Beto, now playing with the tubing on the mask. She thought about the overdue rent, about the medication Beto would need every month going forward. "When do you want me to bring the coats?" "Thursdays. I leave them at the front office by 9. "Thursdays, then." Consuelo lifted Beto, whose breathing had already quieted, and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she stopped. "Doctor, thank you for not calling it a favor." "It's not a favor. It's a trade. Favors get forgotten. Trades get paid." Wesley closed the chart. "See you Thursday, Mrs. Casillas." Outside, a black sedan was parked in front of the office. Behind the tinted window, Mrs. Edna Ingram had been watching. She watched the seamstress walk out with the boy in her arms and linger a moment too long staring back at the window. Mrs. Ingram lowered the glass just a crack. "Gerald," she said to her driver, "find out who that woman is." Gerald stepped out of the car without hurrying, straightening his cap before crossing the street. "And if she turns out to be just another patient, ma'am?" "The doctor sees poor patients all day long. Patients don't stand there staring at windows like they might cry." "Find out who she is." Mrs. Ingram raised the glass again. "And don't tell my son you were asking." "Yes, ma'am. And if the doctor asks why I was gone so long, tell him the car wouldn't start. That's what I pay you for, Gerald, to know when to be creative with the truth." Gerald stood there a moment longer, debating whether to say something. "One more thing, Gerald. Ma'am, if she turns out to be decent people, maybe there's nothing to find out." "That's for me to decide, not you. Go." That evening, in her home workshop, Consuelo put water on to boil for hot cocoa while Beto, now breathing easy and quiet, worked on a pulse with his sister Molly. "Mama, is the doctor your friend now?" Beto asked without looking up from the pieces. "He's my client, sweetheart. I'm going to sew his coats for him." Molly looked up from the puzzle. "Nurse Parker says he never lets anyone fix anything for him." Beto pressed a piece into place with the focused frown of a child solving something much bigger than a puzzle. "She says it's super weird." "Well, he was very kind to you today, wasn't he?" "Yeah." The boy smiled for the first time since morning. "He called me champ." Consuelo poured the cocoa and sat beside her children. The trade was going to save her what she needed, and there was something in Wesley's eyes that had nothing to do with money. "Are you going on Thursday?" Molly asked, always tuned in to what her mother left unspoken. "I'm going on Thursday." "Can I come?" "No, baby. That day you stay with Miss Dorothy. I have work to do." Molly nodded satisfied and returned to the puzzle. "Mama," Beto said suddenly, still not looking up, "if the doctor is nice to you, how come you make that funny face when you say his name?" Consuelo nearly choked on her cocoa. "I do not make a funny face." "Yes, you do. Molly says it's the same face you make when you like something but don't want to say so." Beto snapped another piece into place, proud of his logic. "I'm just saying what I see. Sometimes you see too much for someone so little." Consuelo ruffled his hair, smiling in spite of herself. "Drink your cocoa before it gets cold." Consuelo looked at her two children warm and fed and decided that it did not matter what the neighbors thought. A deal that gave her son his health back was nothing to be ashamed of. At the craft market, before heading to the office one morning, a woman visiting from out of town stopped in front of Consuelo's booth. "Did you make this shawl? It's extraordinary." "I did, and the one next to it if you're interested." "I'll take both. You can't find work like this back home, not even at twice the price." Consuelo wrapped the shawls, tucked the money into the same bag that held her needles and thimble, and hurried toward the office before the clock struck 9. The following Thursday, Consuelo arrived at the office with her sewing bag. Nurse Parker greeted her with a smile that barely concealed her curiosity. "The doctor told me to expect you. He's with a patient, but he'll be right out. Where would you like to sit?" "Wherever there's good light." Parker pointed to a wooden chair beside the filing cabinet near the window. "You're really going to mend his coats?" "That's what we agreed." "It's just that the doctor never asks anyone for help. Not for anything. He once cut his own hand closing a jar and refused to let anyone treat it." Parker lowered her voice. "The fact that he trusts you with this, that means something. He trusts my hands, Parker, not me. With him, those are the same thing, because he never lets anyone touch anything that matters to him. Not his coat, not his father's medical bag, not this office. If he's handing you those coats, it's because he's already decided you matter." "You sound like you're narrating a romance novel." "And I'm almost wrong. Ask anyone in this town." Parker straightened her scrubs satisfied. "Mark my words, Mrs. Casillas." Consuelo didn't know how to answer that, so she took out her scissors and waited. "Blood pressure looks good, Mr. Ansel." "Keep taking that pill in the morning on an empty stomach," Wesley said, walking a patient out with a hand on his shoulder. "See you next week." When the patient had gone, Wesley found Consuelo with the first coat spread open, examining the frayed cuff with the tight expression of someone who has discovered an offense against her craft. "Doctor, this isn't a repair. This is a crime against fabric." "I told you it showed." "It's not just the cuff. Look at the collar." She pointed to a spot near the neckline. "Whoever tried to darn this used sewing machine thread, hand-stitched without a thimble. They bled on it." She indicated a faint dark stain, nearly invisible on the inside of the collar. Wesley went quiet for a moment. "That was my mother, about 2 years ago. She told me that's what she was there for, so I wouldn't have to go through life looking like an orphan." The sentence came out with an edge Consuelo hadn't expected. "I never asked her to fix anything for me after that." "Why not just buy new coats? On what a doctor makes?" "Because these were a gift from my father when I finished my residency, before he passed." Wesley sat down in the chair across from her as though telling it cost less sitting down. I don't want new coats. I want these to last. Consuelo nodded slowly, threading a needle with navy blue thread that was almost a perfect match for the fabric. Then this isn't just any repair. No, it's one of the things I actually care about being done right. And the other 3 coats too came from the hospital at the end of residency. That one I can let go of if you'd rather not bother. I'd rather. If I'm sewing all 4 the same way. I don't leave things half done because they don't come with a story. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to, doctor. That's just how I work. Wesley looked at her a moment too long before turning back to his files. Fine, all 4. All 4. And those 2? Consuelo asked, nodding toward the hospital coats. What's their story? Nothing, really. They handed them to me with a stack of paperwork I signed without reading. Everything has a story, doctor. Even a boring one. Then here's the story. A 28-year-old kid terrified, signing papers he didn't understand in a hospital where nobody knew his name yet. That's not a boring story. It depends on who's telling it. She worked in silence for the first few minutes, while Wesley reviewed charts and now and then glanced up to watch her sew. You sew the way I operate, he said suddenly, as if his whole body was concentrated in the stitch. Like everything else disappears. That's how I was taught. A crooked seam shows more than a lie. Consuelo snipped the trailing thread with a clean motion of the scissors. The cuff is done. Now the collar. How long will it take? However long it takes to do it right. I'm not billing you by the minute, doctor. He smiled. The first full smile Consuelo had seen from him since she'd walked through his door the week before, with Beto struggling to breathe. You can keep seeing patients while you work if you want. I can stay. How do you mean? Thursday afternoons I do follow-up visits, routine things, blood pressure, weight checks. If it doesn't bother you to be here while I go through them, you can stay and work. You get ahead on the job. I get ahead on mine. Consuelo glanced at the worn leather bag in the corner, the one that had clearly accompanied Wesley to more than one emergency call in the middle of the night. All right, doctor, I'll stay. Nurse Parker walked past them with a tray of cotton swabs and couldn't help herself. This is a lovely scene, I have to say. Parker! Going! She disappeared down the hallway, laughing to herself. Between patients coming and going, Consuelo gave the 4 coats back their life, stitch by stitch, while he pretended not to watch her as closely as he really was. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy Consuelo's neighbor came in, complaining of a knee that had been bothering her for 3 days, and sat down to wait her turn beside Consuelo, unable to hide her curiosity. What are you doing in here with your sewing basket, honey? I thought this was a doctor's office, not a tailor shop. The doctor and I made a deal. I mend his coats. He sees my kids. Well, look at that, a trade, Dorothy grinned. And look how fine that looks, you sitting there sewing away and him in there. He's looked out that door 3 times already. I haven't noticed him looking. That's because you haven't lifted your eyes. But I have, and let me tell you, Consuelo, that man does not look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even those nurses they send from the city when he needs backup. How does he look at them? Politely, nothing more. But you, he looks at you like he forgot what he was saying mid-sentence. Dorothy laughed at her own observation. And a doctor doesn't forget things easily, honey. That man studied too many years for that. Nurse Parker walked by with a chart stifling a laugh of her own, and Consuelo felt her face go warmer than the weather called for. Dorothy, you came for gossip and your knee, not necessarily in that order. I came for both, and I'm getting both, so hush. When Wesley called Dorothy in for her turn, Consuelo kept sewing, wondering whether Dorothy only saw romance where there was a fair deal. By the 3rd week, Thursdays had become something more than a trade appointment. Wesley started asking Parker to have coffee ready with a little sugar, though he never said it out loud to Consuelo directly. How did you know I take it this way? Consuelo asked, the 3rd time she found a steaming mug beside her chair. Parker told me you order it like that at Dorothy's diner. That Parker doesn't miss a thing. Neither do I. Wesley said it without looking up from his chart, but Consuelo felt he'd meant it for her. Parker walked by doing her very best impression of someone organizing files. Doctor, at this rate, you're going to have to put her name on the mug. Parker, don't you have patience? I do, doctor, but this is more interesting. She was already gone before he could reply. The Thursdays filled up with conversations that had nothing to do with stitches or prescriptions. My dad used to make house calls out to farms where the roads weren't even fully paved, Wesley told her one afternoon without her asking. I wanted to go to school on a scholarship. My mother insisted on paying for everything herself, and since my dad died, she decided the Ingram name needed a son settled down with the right kind of woman. And nobody asked what you wanted. Nobody then, nobody now. Wesley leaned back in his chair, tired of something he hadn't named. In this family, you don't ask, you comply. And what do you want? Consuelo asked, without stopping her sewing on the last coat. I want the people in this town to have someone to see when they're sick without being ashamed of what they can or can't afford. Wesley leaned back again. That's what I want. The rest my mother decides for me whether I ask her to or not. That sounds exhausting. You know about exhausting, Mrs. Casillas. You've been raising 2 kids alone since your husband passed. Consuelo paused her needle for just a second. Nurse Parker told you that too? The whole town told me that. There are no real secrets here, just silences people agree to respect. Wesley leaned forward a little. How do you manage it? All of it on your own? Like someone carrying water in a cracked pitcher. You plug one hole, another opens, and you keep walking because there's no other option. She laughed softly at her own analogy. My mother used to say that those who can't carry drag, and I drag pretty gracefully, doctor. Don't let the calm fool you. Wesley laughed then, a short, genuine laugh that changed his whole face. How did your husband die, if you don't mind my asking? I don't mind. It's been 3 years now. Consuelo picked the needle back up. He was working construction in the city, fell from a scaffold that wasn't rigged properly. The company didn't even cover the funeral in full. I'm so sorry. So was I. I still am, some days. She paused, the needle suspended in the air. But one day, you get up and there's breakfast to make and you run out of time to feel as much as you'd like to. And Beto remembers him. Beto was 6. He remembers his dad lifting him onto his shoulders to watch the 4th of July parade. That's about it. Consuelo smiled, small and a little sad. Molly was too young. She only knows the photos. It must be hard being both things for them, mom and dad at once. You do what you can, not what you'd wish. Consuelo looked over at him. You do the same, doctor. You carry a whole clinic and an inherited name you didn't ask for. At least no one asks me if I can manage. They just assume. That kind of assumption weighs more than people think. It weighs differently, but it weighs. Wesley went quiet for a moment, watching her sew with an attention that had stopped having anything to do with tailoring. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Casillas? You ask me things every Thursday. One more won't hurt. Why didn't you ever ask anyone for help before I offered the trade, I mean? This town isn't perfect, but there are people in it who help. Consuelo lowered the needle to her lap. Because help that's asked for gets paid back in a different kind of coin. In pity. In favors you owe whether you want to or not. In that look, that poor thing look that gets stuck in my pride like a splinter. She lifted her eyes to his. That's why I accepted your offer. Because you didn't bring pity. You brought work. That's the only thing I know how to offer. It's the only thing I know how to offer too. Truthfully. Well, you're good at it, doctor. The coat you had the first day, the one with the bad cuff, that's the same one your father wore, isn't it? Wesley looked up, surprised she remembered that detail. No, my father's coat I keep folded away. I don't even wear it to sleep. These 4 are mine, the ones he gave me when I finished. But I learned how to close a wound watching him put his on every morning with the same care, like it was the only one he had. And why not ask your mother to buy you new ones if they matter so much? Because I don't want new ones, Consuelo. He caught himself. Mrs. Casillas, he corrected quickly, but she had heard the slip. I want these ones, mended, worn with history. New things tell me nothing. I feel the same way about my grandmother's needles. I could buy factory-made ones, straighter, finer, but they don't sew the same in my hands. Then we understand each other. It seems like we do, Doctor. An older man was helped through the door by his teenage grandson, breathing short and quick. Wesley left everything and knelt beside him. Mr. Calloway, how long have you been like this? Since last night, Doc. Didn't want to bother you. Waiting until it gets worse is what bothers me, so run to the pharmacy, get me this right now. He tore a prescription sheet. Run, don't walk. Consuelo watched Wesley settle the old man on the exam table and speak to him quietly, never letting go of his hand. He's here, Doc, the grandson said, rushing back in breathless. I ran the whole way. Good man, now help me sit him up slowly. When Mr. Calloway had finally settled into an easier breath and dozed off, Wesley returned to his chair, his shirt damp with sweat, his hands still not entirely steady. It's all right, Doctor. You can still be shaken after all these years. It means you still feel it. He passed a hand over his face. Mr. Calloway can't pay either. No insurance, no family with money to spare. What are you going to do? What I always do. Charge what he can manage and let the rest go. Wesley looked at her then with something like embarrassment. My mother says I'll never be wealthy doing it this way. Your mother hasn't seen what I just saw. What did you see? A man who values the life of an old man with no money more than the name he carries. That's not something you buy or inherit, Doctor. You either are that or you aren't. Wesley didn't answer, but he watched her sew for a long, quiet stretch with an expression Consuelo didn't yet let herself interpret. That Thursday, Consuelo laid out all 4 finished coats. Wesley ran his fingers along the collar where the stain had been along the cuff where the clumsy repair had been. Perfect seams, clean as if they had never been touched. They look brand new. They look better than new. New doesn't have any history. He looked at her then differently, without the professional distance of that first day. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Consuelo, Wesley said, using her first name for the first time, without the misses that had kept them at a careful distance. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Not here, out on the square. She was about to answer when the phone rang and Parker appeared in the doorway with a look Wesley knew too well. Doctor, it's your mother. She says it's urgent. Wesley sighed and took the call in the back office. Consuelo could catch fragments through the wall. The dinner Saturday. The Roldans are driving down from the city. I already told you it matters to the family. When Wesley came back, something in his face had been switched off. Everything okay, Doctor? Everything's fine, he said, though they both knew it wasn't. See you next Thursday, Consuelo. The following Saturday, Mrs. Edna Ingram hosted a dinner at the family's home with linen napkins and hired staff. Wesley arrived late with his medical bag still in hand and found the dining room set for 18 and a young woman named Fiona seated in his usual place. Sorry for the delay. A patient doesn't announce when they're going to get sick. Sit down, sweetheart. We're almost at the second course. His mother gestured to the chair beside Fiona with a smile that allowed no argument. Fiona smiled pleasantly, and Wesley smiled back without yet knowing that the evening was about to redirect his life without him saying a single word to bring it about. It was after the second course, before the main dish arrived, that Mrs. Ingram stood up with her wine glass raised. I want to take advantage of having everyone here, she said with the measured voice of someone who has rehearsed this more than once, to announce something this family has been looking forward to for quite some time. Mom? Wesley felt his stomach drop. What are you? Wesley and Fiona are getting married. She didn't give him time to finish. The date is set, 2 months from now, at St. Catherine's. A round of applause filled the dining room before Wesley could react. Mrs. Rowland, Fiona's mother, leaned toward Edna with a conspiratorial smile. We need to talk about the dress. I was thinking we'd have it made in the city, but I've heard there's a seamstress here who does remarkable work. There is a seamstress here, yes. She can handle the ceremony shawl. The dress itself comes from the city as it should. Of course, money is no object. Money has never been the object, Mrs. Rowland. The object is that everything reflect the family name appropriately. Mr. Rowland, Fiona's father, got up to embrace Wesley with the enthusiasm of a deal just closed. About time, son. My daughter couldn't have found a better match in this whole state. Mr. Rowland, I haven't... No need to be modest. Two families like ours together, this is going to be the wedding of the year. Wesley caught Fiona's eyes across the table, looking for the same surprise he felt. Did you know about this? She asked her mother quietly, leaning close with a strained smile. No, Mom, but what does it matter? Fiona looked down at her wine. It always ends up being what you all decide anyway. Don't say that on your engagement night, darling. Smile, everyone is watching. Fiona smiled with a quiet resignation that hurt Wesley to recognize, because it was the same resignation with which he had accepted every decision his mother had made on his behalf. Mom, he said, leaning close to her while the guests toasted, you can't announce something we never discussed. I announce it this way because if I leave it to you to discuss, you will postpone it until your whole life has passed waiting for Thursdays like they're the only day on the calendar. Mrs. Ingram kept her smile directed at the room, but her voice was sharp and low when she turned back to her son. Smile, Wesley. All these people came to celebrate your happiness. Wesley raised his glass because he could not think of anything else to do, and smiled just enough that only his mother could tell it wasn't real. By the time the last course was cleared, the whole town already knew what had been announced that evening, even before the official statement the following day. Consuelo heard about it the next morning at the craft market, while arranging the shawls she had embroidered that week. You heard? Dorothy came over with her grocery bag and the urgency of someone carrying news that's burning a hole in her hands. Dr. Wesley is getting engaged to a girl from the city, the Rowland family. They own property out past the county line. They say she went to conservatory, plays the piano. Consuelo kept folding the shawl between her fingers, though she felt the air in the plaza go heavier all at once. When did this happen? Last night, at his mother's dinner. They've already set a date, 2 months out. Story is, his mother arranged the whole thing, didn't even ask the doctor if he wanted it. That's not something you need to be telling me, Dorothy. Honey, please. The whole town knows you've been going to that office on Thursdays to sew, and that it stopped being just sewing a long time ago. Consuelo finished folding the last shawl and set it in the display with more force than she needed. We're business partners, in a trade, nothing more. If you say so, honey. Dorothy, one last thing. Yes? If anyone asks, you can tell them this means nothing to me. Who the doctor marries is none of my business. I can say that. I don't know if anyone will believe me. That same afternoon, Consuelo found an envelope slipped under the workshop door, embossed with the Ingram family seal. The note inside was written in firm, cold handwriting. Mrs. Casillas, I wish to thank you for the services rendered to my son. Enclosed, you will find full payment for the 4 coats so that there is no need for further visits to the office. With the wedding approaching, it is time for everyone to return to their proper place. Sincerely, Edna Ingram. Inside the envelope was a fold of bills, far more than 4 mended coats could reasonably cost at any tailor in the county. Consuelo stood holding the card in one hand and the money in the other, feeling as though someone had put a price on something that money was never meant to touch. Mama, what's that? Molly asked, tugging at her skirt. Nothing, baby. A payment. Consuelo tucked the envelope into the drawer where she kept her bills. Go wash your hands for dinner. Beto had been listening from the doorway to his room and walked over quietly. Mama, is that payment so we stop sewing for the doctor? Something like that, sweetheart. Is that good or bad? I honestly don't know yet, Beto. I honestly don't know. A little later, Dorothy knocked on the door with the excuse of returning a dress pattern, though in reality she had come to check on her. Is it true what they're saying, that the doctor's mother sent you an envelope? It's true. How much was in it? More than 4 coats are worth. She was paying you to stay away. That's how I read it. Consuelo sat down on the front step, tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. I'm not going Thursday. That's my answer. I'm not going. And if he comes looking for you, Consuelo, what are you going to say? That he's too late, that a trade is not a promise and I held up my end. You've got that rehearsed already. Since last night, Dorothy. Don't think it came easy. Dorothy squeezed her hand before leaving without saying anything more, because sometimes the greatest comfort is knowing when not to push. That night, after putting the children to bed, Consuelo sat at her sewing machine without turning it on, thinking about the question Wesley never finished before the phone rang. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? He never finished asking. And it no longer mattered because the whole town, and most of all his mother, had decided that coffee would never be poured. She picked up the card and read it one more time. It is time for everyone to return to their proper place. She wondered what exactly her place was, or whether it was a smaller space than she had been allowing herself to imagine, sized to fit what Edna Ingram considered appropriate for a seamstress from a small town. She tucked the card away and decided that the following Thursday she would not go to the office. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of having to tell her twice. At the family home, Wesley found his mother, reviewing table linens in the dining room, as if the night before had not been enough to reroute her son's life without consulting him. Mom, what did you do? I organized a dinner, that's all. You announced an engagement I never agreed to. Mrs. Ingram set the linen on the table with perfect composure. The same composure she applied to everything, even things that broke others, completely. Fiona is an educated young woman from a good family. You need a partner like that. And this town needs to see that the Ingram name is still solid. I didn't ask you for a wife, and certainly not one you picked without telling me. Your father didn't choose his wife either, and we were happy for 28 years. Her voice did not rise a single note, but it cut like a pair of brand new scissors. Love is something you grow into, Wesley. What you cannot grow back is a reputation once it's damaged. And the seamstress mom, did you send her a note explaining how love is something you grow into? Mrs. Ingram did not flinch. I paid her what she was owed, generously. You had no right to do that. I have every right of a mother who refuses to stand by while her son confuses gratitude with something else. She straightened the collar of his shirt, a gesture that, in another woman, might have been tender, but in her landed like a warning. That woman sews beautifully, Wesley. But sewing beautifully does not get you a seat at this table. Wesley stepped back from her touch. I'm going to call Consuelo tomorrow and tell her that note was not from me. Do as you like. The wedding has a date and this whole town is expecting it. A Thursday distraction is not going to change that. In the office the next morning, Nurse Parker met Wesley at the door with her arms folded before he could even hang up his jacket. Is it true what they're saying? That you're engaged to that Rowland girl? My mother announced it last night. I didn't say yes to anything. Well, all of Millhaven is already celebrating it, and Mrs. Casillas has surely already heard. Parker lowered her voice, though the waiting room was empty. What are you going to do now? I'm going to call her. Explain. Explain what exactly? Doctor, that you're marrying another woman, even though anyone who watches you breathe can tell you don't want to? That doesn't explain anything. That's something you either fix or you don't. And if it's too late to fix Parker, Doctor, the wedding hasn't happened yet. Too late is after, not before. Parker put a hand on his shoulder. Call her. Wesley did not answer, but he picked up the office phone with a determination Parker had not seen from him in months. That same morning, Wesley dialed Consuelo's workshop 3 times. The first 2 no one picked up. On the third, the voice of Mrs. Terry, her neighbor, answered, out of breath, as if she had crossed the room at a sprint. Hello, Casillas Workshop. Mrs. Terry, this is Dr. Wesley Ingram. I need to speak with Consuelo. It's important. There was a pause on the other end, just barely a beat too long. Oh, doctor, what a shame. She headed out early this morning with the kids. Didn't say when she'd be back. Are you sure I need to tell her something before? Positive, doctor. You know how it goes with errands. She just goes and goes. Mrs. Terry cleared her throat. You want me to leave word that you called? Tell her it was urgent. Tell her the letter from my mother was a mistake I didn't make. I'll pass it along, doctor, don't you worry. Mrs. Terry hung up before Wesley finished his sentence. It wasn't entirely a lie. Consuelo crouched behind the curtain with Beto, and Molly, perfectly still beside her, had asked her neighbor to say exactly that. Mama, Molly whispered, why don't you want to talk to the doctor? Because sometimes, sweetheart, it's better not to hear something you've already guessed is going to hurt. Consuelo stepped away from the window only once she heard Wesley's car pull away down the street. Come on, let's get to the kitchen. We're going to be late for everything. 2 Thursdays passed without Consuelo returning to the office, and the workshop filled with a different kind of quiet. Beto asked about the doctor twice, Molly once. He doesn't like us anymore, does he, Mama? Of course he does, baby. He's just very busy right now. Busy with the wedding. Consuelo didn't answer because there was nothing to say that wouldn't hurt to say out loud. The blow came on a Tuesday morning, when Gerald, Mrs. Ingram's driver, knocked on the workshop door with a box wrapped in fine paper and a card on top. Before she opened it, Consuelo knelt in front of Beto and Molly. I need to step out for a little while. You two stay with Miss Dorothy, okay? Is it about the doctor, Mama? Beto asked, direct as always. It's about work, sweetheart, that's all. She kissed each of them on the forehead. She opened the door. Mrs. Ingram would like to see you at the house this afternoon, ma'am. She says it's about the wedding. Tell her I'm busy. You can tell her yourself, I'm just the messenger. Gerald dropped his voice something close to embarrassment in it. It's about the bride's ceremony shawl, ma'am. They say there's no one in the state who does that kind of embroidery better than you. What do you think about all this, Gerald R.? You see them every day. Gerald shifted on his feet, uncomfortable with the question. I just drive, ma'am. They don't pay me for opinions. But you have one. I think the doctor has been carrying a look on his face lately that he didn't have before you started coming on Thursdays. Gerald put his cap back on, as if he could take back what he'd just said. And I think Mrs. Ingram noticed it too. That's probably why she's calling you and not some other seamstress. That does not make me feel better, Gerald. I didn't say it to make you feel better, ma'am. I said it so you'd go in with your eyes open. Thank you, genuinely. Please don't thank me, ma'am, and please don't tell anyone I said any of that. That afternoon, when she arrived at the Ingram home, she found Mrs. Edna Ingram waiting in a sitting room lined with portraits of generations of people with important last names. Mrs. Casillas, thank you for coming. Your driver made it sound like an emergency. It is one in a sense. Fiona needs a hand-embroidered ceremony shawl for the wedding, in the regional tradition. I will pay you 3 times your normal rate. Mrs. Ingram held her gaze with a calm that showed nothing beneath the surface. You are, from what I understand, the finest embroiderer in the region. There are other seamstresses in town, Mrs. Ingram. I'm not the only one. But you are the best, and for my son's wedding, I only accept the best. A calculated pause. Besides, I imagine the money would be welcome. I understand your daughter's school fees are due next month, and those things add up. Consuelo felt the blow land exactly where it had been aimed. Mrs. Ingram knew about the money, and she was using it like a rope to tie Consuelo to the other woman's dress. Why me, Mrs. Ingram? You know it isn't only my work you're calling about. Mrs. Ingram didn't deny it. I'm calling you because I need the finest embroidery in the region, and because I believe you, more than anyone, would benefit from understanding clearly how things work in this family, and in this town. She took one step forward. You sew beautifully, Mrs. Casillas, but beautiful sewing does not change a family name. Accept the work, earn your money with dignity, and leave my son in peace. Consuelo thought of Molly, of the rent, of the bills that a proud refusal would not pay. And if I say no, Mrs. Ingram, then I find another seamstress and you go without the money you need. The shawl will be made either way, Mrs. Casillas. The only question is whether the payment goes to you or someone else. That's not a question, that's a threat with good manners. Call it what you like, I call it business. I accept the work, Consuelo said with a steadiness in her voice that she did not feel at all inside, but not for the reason you think. I accept it because I have 2 children to feed and because my work is worth what it's worth, regardless of who it's for. As you wish, Mrs. Ingram almost smiled. Fiona will expect you tomorrow for the first fitting. That night, Consuelo unfolded the white linen for the shawl so fine it looked as though it might tear just from being looked at, and sat before her machine without being able to begin. "Mama, you're not asleep yet." Beto appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing one eye. "Almost, baby. I'm just getting this sorted out." "Is that for the doctor's wedding?" "It's a shawl, that's all." Consuelo folded the fabric again, as if hiding it could also hide what she was feeling. "Go to bed. You have school tomorrow." Beto went, and Consuelo sat alone, thinking about the dress another woman would wear when she married the man who had, without her even looking for it, gotten under her skin. She cried that night in silence so the children wouldn't hear pressing the hem of her work shawl against her mouth, so not even a sound escaped. The next morning, Molly found her with swollen eyes while she braided her daughter's hair for school. "Mama, did you cry, a little baby?" Sometimes even grown-ups can't hold back what they feel. "Because of the doctor?" Consuelo stopped the comb for a second. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me. I just put it together myself, like when I learned to do braids." Molly looked at her own reflection in the little hand mirror, serious for her age. "Beto says you only cry over people who matter to you." "Beto says a lot of things that aren't his to understand yet." Consuelo finished the last pull of the braid and kissed the top of her head. "Go on, you'll be late." She showed up on time with her head held high because a crooked seam shows more than a lie, and she was not about to let anyone see either one. Fiona Rowland turned out to be a kind young woman. More so than Consuelo would have wanted, because hating a faceless stranger was easy, and hating someone kind was a great deal harder. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Casillas," Fiona said, turning before the mirror with the shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. "I've never seen embroidery this fine. They don't do this where I'm from. It's Millhaven work, passed down generation to generation." "Who taught you?" "My grandmother. And yours?" "Piano, my mother since I was 5, though she never asked me if I wanted to learn." Fiona smiled with an honesty that surprised even herself. "It seems we have that in common, Mrs. Casillas. Things handed down to us before we knew to have an opinion." "Raise your left arm a little, please, so I can see the fall of the fabric." Fiona obeyed, and in the silence that followed, while Consuelo pinned with a mouthful of needles, the young woman worked up the courage to ask something she had been turning over for days. "Do you know Dr. Ingram well?" Consuelo was still for just a moment before answering. "I mended his coats. That's about the extent of it. It's just that he acts strangely around me, polite but distant, like someone doing an obligation." Fiona looked at her own reflection with a sadness that seemed genuine. "My mother says that's just how men are at first, that the feeling comes after the wedding. But I'm not sure I believe that." "Miss Fiona, if you don't mind my asking, do you love him?" Fiona stared at her own reflection for a long moment before she answered. "I think I could, given time. He's a good man. You can see it in how he treats people." She let her arm fall, letting Consuelo finish the last pin. "But wanting to love someone given time isn't the same as loving them now, is it? You've been married. Tell me the truth." "No 2 loves are the same, Miss Fiona. Mine came in slowly, almost without my noticing, and it lasted as long as it lasted." Consuelo stood and smoothed the fabric with her hands. "But I can't tell you whether yours is coming or not. Nobody knows that until it happens, or until you run out of patience waiting." "That's an honest answer for a seamstress." "It's the only thing I know how to offer, same as the doctor." Fiona looked at her with something that edged toward suspicion, and Consuelo turned her attention to the last few pins, grateful for the excuse to keep her hands busy. The evening of the wedding rehearsal, with both families gathered in the garden under strands of hanging lights, Consuelo arrived through the service entrance with the finished shawl. "You're not staying?" one of the catering staff asked, recognizing her from the market. "All anyone can talk about in there is the shawl you made." "I'm just here to deliver it. This isn't my party." She had not planned to stay, only to hand off her work and slip back out the way she'd come. She had not counted on Wesley seeing her cross the garden. "Consuelo!" She stopped with the shawl box pressed to her chest. "Doctor, what are you doing out here? I brought the shawl. Your mother hired me." Something broke on Wesley's face, a mix of fury and shame he didn't bother trying to hide. "My mother asked you to sew the shawl for my wedding?" "She didn't ask. She instructed me, with the grace of someone who knows exactly where to press." Consuelo kept her voice low, aware of the guests only a few yards away. "I needed the money. Molly's school fees are due. You should have told me." "What good would that have done? So you could fight with your mother again and I'd end up looking even worse in front of everyone?" Consuelo shook her head. "I did my part, doctor. Let me do what I came to do, which is deliver this and go." Wesley reached for her arm. Gently, barely a touch, but enough to stop her. "Don't go yet." It was then that Consuelo noticed something different about his suit jacket. The collar just visible under the lapel was from one of the coats she had mended herself. "Doctor, are you wearing your lab coat under that jacket? I've been wearing it since you finished it." Wesley did not lower his voice, even as a couple of guests began glancing their way. "It's the only thing about tonight that feels truly mine." "Wesley," Mrs. Ingram's voice cut across the garden. She approached with her social smile in place and nothing calm in her eyes. "What on earth are you wearing under that jacket? You look like a staff member at your own party." "I'm a doctor, Mom. That's what I am." "Tonight you are Fiona Rowland's fiancé, and you will behave accordingly." She dropped her voice to a sharp whisper, aimed only at him. "Take that coat off right now, or you will embarrass this family in front of the people whose opinion matters most." Wesley looked at his mother, then at Consuelo, who stood still with the shawl box in her arms, not sure whether to stay or disappear into the crowd. "I'm not taking it off, Mom. Not tonight, not any night." He buttoned his jacket over the mended collar without yielding a single inch. "But you're right about one thing. It's not the moment. Not yet." Mrs. Ingram walked away with her smile rebuilt, leaving Wesley and Consuelo alone at the edge of the garden. "What did you mean by not yet?" Consuelo asked. "I mean I need time, but I'm running out of it." Wesley looked at her with an urgency he had never shown on any of those Thursdays. "The wedding is in 8 days, Consuelo." "I know. I embroidered the shawl." "And what do you do with those 8 days, Doctor? I don't know yet. But I know I cannot walk into that church pretending I didn't watch you cross this garden tonight." He paused. "I don't want to marry Fiona. But that's not something I say to you. That's something I need to say to her and to my mother and to the whole town if it comes to that." Consuelo took a step back toward the service exit. "I've done my part. I delivered the work. The rest is not mine to stitch together." Fiona appeared between the garden lights before Consuelo reached the door with an expression that was not surprise. It was relief that had been held in too long. "Mrs. Casillas." Fiona touched her arm gently. "Don't go yet." She turned to Wesley. "And you don't have to keep pretending. Not with me, at least." "Fiona, I never meant to—" "I know. I've spent weeks watching your face go dim when you talk to me and come alive whenever someone mentions Thursdays." Fiona smiled without bitterness, with a quiet sadness. "I'm not blind, Wesley. I was just waiting for you to find the nerve to say it before my mother had finished embroidering my initials onto the napkins." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry yet. Save the sorry for when it counts." She looked at Consuelo for a moment, woman to woman. "Finish sewing what you have to sew, Mrs. Casillas, and you, Wesley, finish deciding what you've already decided. You're just not saying it out loud yet." She walked toward the lights before either of them could answer, leaving between them a silence that was different from before. one that didn't weigh quite as much. She left without looking back, and Wesley stood there with his jacket buttoned over the mended coat, feeling time slipping like thread off a poorly loaded bobbin. The basilica that Saturday morning was dressed in white flowers, with a whole town squeezed into the pews to watch the doctor who had always treated them fairly get married. "Are they saying the bride is arriving in a horse-drawn carriage?" whispered a woman in the third pew. "What I'm saying is I hope they're happy," her neighbor replied without great conviction. "Though the doctor never looked at anyone the way they say he looks at the seamstress." "Shh, don't say that here." "Has the bride arrived?" "Not yet. They say she's getting ready at the Rowland house." "She better hurry. The father is getting anxious." Consuelo had not planned to go. She stayed in her workshop sewing, trying not to think about what was happening inside that church at that very moment. It was Parker who came running breathless, knocking on the workshop door with both hands. "Consuelo, you have to come. The doctor's standing at the altar, and he won't say yes." "What? You heard me. The priest has asked him twice, and he just stands there staring at the door, like he's waiting for someone." Parker grabbed her by the arm. "He's waiting for you, Consuelo. Don't be stubborn. Go." "And if I get there and he's already said yes, Parker, then you were wrong with your head held high. That's better than spending your whole life here wondering." "Run." Consuelo ran 5 blocks to the church with her heart pounding louder than any bell. She pushed through the side door just as the priest was putting the question to Wesley for the 3rd time. "Wesley Ingram, do you take Fiona Rowland to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Wesley, standing at the altar, turned his head toward the side door at the exact moment Consuelo appeared, breathless, her work shawl over her shoulders. "No," said Wesley, his voice clear, steady, carrying through the whole church. "I don't." The priest book, still open in his hands, did not know what to do. "Son, are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything. I'm sorry about the wedding, Father." A murmur moved through every pew. Mrs. Ingram rose from the front row, white-faced. "Wesley, do not do this." "It's already done, Mom." Wesley unbuttoned his formal jacket slowly in front of everyone and let it fall across the altar rail. Underneath he wore the white lab coat, the one with the mended collar, the one with the perfect cuff that Consuelo had sewn stitch by stitch. "This is the only thing that actually fits me, and I'm not taking it off for a family name or a wedding that was never mine." Fiona, standing beside the altar, with the embroidered shawl across her shoulders, pressed her hand to her mouth, looking more relieved than her mother would have liked anyone to notice. "Wesley," Fiona said with a quiet that startled the room, "I think we both already knew this wasn't going to work. I'm sorry, Fiona, truly." "Don't be sorry yet. I didn't want to learn to love someone after the wedding either." Fiona turned toward her own mother, who waited furious at the foot of the altar steps. "Let's go home, Mom. There's nothing left to do here." Mr. Rowland, red-faced, managed to say, "This is not over, Ingram." "Dad, please," Fiona said, taking him by the arm. "Let's just go." Wesley came down the altar steps in his lab coat and walked directly to where Consuelo was still standing, still not quite able to believe what she had just witnessed. "Consuelo." His voice was different from any Thursday, from anything she had heard from him. "I choose you. The whole town is watching." "Let them watch. I am done living for the town's approval." He took 1 step closer. "I choose you, Consuelo, not because you owe me anything and not because I owe you anything either. I choose you because since you walked into my office carrying Beto, I have not been able to look at anything the same way." Fiona, already heading up the aisle with her mother, stopped for just a moment. "I hope you're both genuinely happy." "Thank you, Fiona," Consuelo said, from the heart. Mrs. Ingram came down the center aisle, fury barely contained under the perfect posture. "Wesley, if you do this, you can forget the name, forget the office your father left you, forget all of it. The office my father left me exists because he treated whoever needed treatment whether they could pay or not. That is what I'm going to keep doing, with or without the name over the door." Wesley did not take his eyes off Consuelo for even a second. And if the cost of staying with the woman who taught me that things done well are things that last is losing a family name, then I've already chosen, and I will not spend one moment regretting it. The whole church held still until a voice rang out from somewhere in the back. "That's right, Doctor." It was Dorothy, on her feet on the pew, applauding with both hands. Half the room joined in, until the applause filled the church entirely. Consuelo took the hand Wesley held out to her, feeling under her fingers the fabric of the coat she knew by every stitch. "Do you choose me too?" he asked quietly, just for her. "From the very first Thursday, Doctor," she smiled with damp eyes. "You just took longer to figure it out." Dorothy pushed through the crowd until she reached them, her own eyes glistening, smile wider than her face could quite contain. "It's about time, honey. It's about time." "Dorothy, please. I still can't catch my breath." "Then catch it fast, because this whole town is going to tell their grandchild Wren they were here the day a doctor left a Roland girl at the altar for a seamstress." Dorothy took both their hands and squeezed. "And I'm going to be the one who tells it first, so it gets told right." Parker arrived behind her, still out of breath. "I told you both. I told you this day was coming." "You didn't tell us anything, Parker. You guessed." "Guessing right counts, Mrs. Casillas." Several months later, Bethel came running in from outside with his school backpack still bouncing on his shoulders. "Wesley, Nurse Parker says the new sign is ready. Can we hang it today? No more doctor?" Wesley feigned surprise, though he had been waiting for exactly that shift for weeks. Beto went red, glancing sideways at his mother, who was sewing by the window, with Molly sitting beside her, learning to thread a needle. "You're not just my doctor anymore. You basically live here." Beto shrugged, looking for his mother's reaction. "Is it okay if I call you that?" "More than okay, champ." Leslie ruffled his hair, the same tenderness as the first day he had held the boy's small face with the oxygen mask in place. "Let's go hang that sign before Parker gets tired of waiting on us." They hung it together, all three of them. When it was straight and settled, Wesley put an arm around Consuelo's shoulders and read aloud the words she had embroidered into the fabric herself. "If you can't pay for the full visit, ask about the trade." He smiled at her. "It came out straight, Mrs. Casillas." "It came out straight, Dr. Ingram." Consuelo tucked the needle back into her grandmother's thimble, as everything that truly matters should. Beto no longer needed the nebulizer as often. Molly learned a new stitch every Thursday, and the Thursdays remained the day Wesley saw whoever walked through the door, with money or without. From 0 to 10, how much would you pay with what you know how to do, rather than lose your dignity? Let us know in the comments.